All right, I've got 7 o'clock.
That is Dr. Harmon. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm glad not to be taking church history right
And Jerret, in this context, just call it speak.
now. I don't know if I'm wired that way.
I'm not either with other professors. I get it.
That was not the question. I was going.
All right, I am missing my message box. I was going to message all of y'all something.
623.
Oh, here it is.
Stand by me a minute. Well, just waiting. Oh, hold on.
I want to go to Jennifer's house.
We're going to say hello. It's Darlene John Henderson.
I want whatever you're fixing.
We're going to go off video so we can eat.
All right, y'all, I am feeling really ignorant. Where is the message function?
Wow.
I think you hover over your screen and at the bottom it says chat.
I am not seeing chat. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Yes. All right. I am going to add the address right now for the MLK committee address for donations. And just a reminder, we are asking for y'all. I'm hearing an echo. That's why I keep stumbling. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know. Let's see. All right. I think that.
Oh, more people.
All right. And I'm just going to write.
Oh, okay.
I know we still have a few more folks jumping on. I'm going to give everyone just another minute or so. But just real quick, I wanted to share that. And just as a way to honor Jerret and Andrea for being here with us tonight, we are simply asking if you would consider making a donation to the scholarship fund of the MLK committee of the New Hope community. And for those of you who are familiar with Rutherfordton and just kind of surrounding areas, the MLK committee is the one that plans the MLK service on Sunday and Monday of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend, and they always do an excellent job there. Not only did they plan that service, they were responsible for in Rutherfordton in July, the Black Lives Matter Walking Together in Love. They are responsible for putting that together. And this scholarship goes to deserving as well as senior high school students in need to help further their college education in the first year. And so we're wanting to do that in honor of Jerret and Andrea. So that address is here on the chat box. I've also included it in the Facebook group, and just excited to be able to share this opportunity with you. Wanted to say just a word to, I see a few faces that are new to us on Monday night. It's good to see you. I'm Tim Marsh. I'm pastor at First Baptist Church in Rutherford, North Carolina, but we're just been doing some of these Monday evening chats around different topics. We have read the book White Fragility together, and we've had conversations on that. We have talked to some African Americans in our community about different ways to be allies and activists in the Black Lives Matter movement. We had some great conversations around those. And so it's just really good to be able to join in. We have been doing them weekly. We've kind of taken a little bit of a break, but I wanted to share just a thought too for the next one. And I've put this in Facebook. If you are interested, I'm in the process of reading the Malcolm X biography that's also co-authored by Alex Haley. When I got it, it was about a $5 paperback. I checked Amazon today and it was $15 as well as back ordered. So if I imagine there are many ways you could get it, but I was looking at maybe September 14 for that. So just wanted to kind of share that, and I'll keep some more information in Facebook going if there's interest in doing that. So again, that'll be on September 14, 7 o'clock. It'll just be a one night conversation on the Malcolm X biography, and so certainly looking forward to some conversation. But let's see, we've got 17 folks here now, and let's see, okay. Jerret, I was just trying to get back to you and Andrea there. So I see you now back at the top of the screen, making sure you're still with us. But
Still here.
Real quick, I don't know if we have a lot of time to do formal introductions of everybody who's on. So simply what I'm going to say is maybe when we have some time for some question and answer, if you want to just, as you ask the question to Jerret and Andrea, if you would maybe identify who you are, maybe just a very, very brief word there. I know some of us know each other, but I know there are some of those of us who may still not be quite as familiar with one another. It's a privilege to be able to introduce the Reverend Dr. Jerret Fite, and then Andrea Fite, Dr. Andrea Fite, who is an attorney. We've got a pastor and an attorney here with us tonight, and I believe Jerret is at his second church since leaving Rutherfordton. But we kind of know y'all best from the time that you were at St. John's AME Zion here in Rutherfordton. Jerret, I tell people, we hosted the MLK service in January of 2016 when you preached, and we had to check our foundations after because the building rocked. It was just like the book of Acts. It said the place where they were praying was shaken, and ours certainly was. And it was such a powerful service and a powerful sermon that you did. But then not only that, we had the opportunity to work together on several projects, and Jerret was still pastor at St. John's when the Rutherfordton Reconciliation Facebook page kind of got off the ground. We had an event down at Second Baptist in July of 2016 where we were bringing the African American community, our police officers, white communities together to have a time of prayer in wake of several shootings that summer. The most recent to that was the death of Philando Castile. And then at St. John's in October of that year, we hosted a forum with African American, Latino, and Caucasian participants on a panel talking about race in our community and their experiences. Andrea was the host and just did a wonderful job there. But we basically asked Jerret and Andrea to come and join us tonight, just simply, to talk about their experiences as African Americans in our country, just life experiences, but then also just to kind of really get real about what they are seeing. And I shared with Jerret on the phone a couple of weeks ago, we've been talking about what it means to be allies as a white community. We're trying to learn what it means for the African American experience in our country right now, especially the South, especially in our part of North Carolina where we are. what we can do, but also just we've been trying to have some very serious and real conversations. And so I'm just looking forward. I'm going to turn it over to y'all, and we'll have, just let you go, and we'll just kind of see where this conversation leads. But we're certainly grateful that y'all are here with us tonight, and with the donations to the scholarship fund, we certainly want to honor you and thank you for your presence with us tonight. And if y'all haven't already, if you can mute yourselves until speaking, that will get less feedback that way. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Well, first, I want to thank you all for creating this space to allow us to be able, in some kind of way, share our experience. I always say, even though we're visibly different by the color of our skin, we are all a part of one race, of the human race. But we recognize that everybody doesn't see those things the same way. And so living in the country, I have personally had experiences to where, I'm not going to give the city, in our wonderful state of North Carolina, I'm not going to give the city, but I have been pulled over for no apparent reason whatsoever. No ticket came as a result. Thank God my license and registration were up to date. I had insurance on my vehicle. All my boxes were checked. Car was searched and all of that. And sitting in your vehicle or sitting on the curb while people search your vehicle, seeing the climate of things that happen in the country, it puts me at a place of dis-ease. Now, some would say, why didn't you stand up? You had rights. You didn't have to. But I have a 21-year-old son, and I tell him, stay silent long enough to fight later. It's a sad reality that you can't express your rights in danger of potentially not being able to get home. I don't want to leave my 3 children and my wife to plan my funeral only because I had something to say. I would rather say something alive later and live to continue to fight the fight and continue to make change while I'm still here, instead of fighting in the moment and then not being able to fight ever again. It's living with that kind of fear day in and day out, many times that warrants sometimes for us to march, for us to, as former late great John Lewis said, get in some good trouble. It is very imperative, because that is, while we're alive, that is the fight that we have and the apparatus that we have in order to fight. And so I want to continue to voice to all those that the best thing that can happen for our partnership with all America, whether it's Asian America, Caucasian America, Hispanic Americans, we all need to come together and voice the opinion. James Cone deals with the theology of the oppressed, and we that have been oppressed in any kind of way, doesn't matter the color of your skin, should stand with one another, because Dr. King said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so we want to continue to get in some good trouble for the sake of justice.
That's great, babe. I don't know how I follow that, which is why you're the preacher and I'm the lawyer. I think I will talk about it from my experience of growing up in a rural area. I grew up in Lawndale, for those of you who are familiar at all with Cleveland County. That's the top end of the county. And quite frankly, even more so than the heart of Cleveland County, it's the African American or Black population there is much smaller than in the remaining part of the county. And so it was nothing to see folks driving trucks and cars with Confederate flags and representing to all of us that was very much part of their heritage. And not so much a symbol of hate. And so I grew up having those conversations pretty early, as early as I would say elementary school, talking with my friends whose families were like, yes, so we fly the Confederate flag, but we like black people, and we're not racist. And so, you know, that tension, or that acknowledgement of racial tension happened for me at a very early age. I will tell you that friends of mine that I grew up with would tell me that we can be friends at school, and we can hang out at school, but there would never be a time where I would be allowed to come over to their homes because their parents weren't comfortable with having a young black girl come over to their homes, just because that was something that was very foreign to them. I'll fast forward to the middle school years, and I'll say that I was very fortunate to have educators in my life who were not people of color necessarily, but were I would consider them allies. And so that's kind of where I want to hang my hat tonight with you all, and talking about how we can be proactive as a community to help each other understand one another better. Like I said, early in elementary school, I had friends who who were fine with being friends with me at school, but didn't want me to come to their homes. But by the time I was in middle school, I was starting to understand what that symbol meant, what the Confederate flag meant. All I knew it was red, white, and blue like the American flag as a child, but I didn't realize what it meant in terms of slavery, of course, and all of the historical baggage that comes along with it. By the time I made it to middle school and started to understand a little bit more about it, I was fortunate to be introduced to educators who walked through that history with a sense of compassion and balance for not only African American students, but for Caucasian students, and allowed us to understand how it not only impacted our past, but certainly our present. And I want to acknowledge that for a second, because prior to that point, prior to my middle school years, I had not had any educator at any point talk to us about the significance of history, and certainly African American history, and how we could eventually we being African American people, could be successful based upon just our work ethic and so forth. So to teach it with compassion, to talk about the slavery era with compassion, and to talk about heroes and thought-provoking people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, and all of these other leaders who, all the way up through the present, who were relevant and who were impactful to not only to the African American race, but to America, was significant for me. And I would say as early as middle school, and I don't mind calling her name, Jackie Owens, at Burns, was probably the first white woman to teach with compassion and introduce our classroom to possibilities of success beyond the white race. And that was a turning point for me. That was a turning point for me as a student, because while I had been a straight A student to that point, and I was doing well as in terms of navigating those academic waters, I had not seen anything that would tell me that I could be where I am today, other than my parents. And I have to praise God for my parents, because they told me from very early on that I could be anything that I wanted to be. But to be able to have an educator to speak life into me at that point, it was such a blessing. So I think I'm going way too far off here, but I just have to say that educators who breathe life into young people really, really can turn the tide. They can turn the tide.
It will. Your shoes.
Um,
Yes, I know why.
I think in starting the conversation, tonight, picking up on those, both of you have, talked about, having experiences that, I guess to us are not common as white people, but then also experiences that, we're hearing about and we're learning about. But both of y'all are just very successful in your professions. I mean, Jerret, in your track as a pastor, D-Min grad, and just really doing wonderful things at each church that you've served. Andrea, just, going forward in your career as an attorney. And you talked about some of the encouraging parts, but I guess what I'm saying is, have you ever experienced or felt like someone used your race as a roadblock to getting to where you are today? I'm just interested in what that felt like, and how can we as white people, when we hear of those things happening, how can we come alongside you and make sure that those opportunities to succeed are just and fair?
So may I start? I don't know that it's blatant, Tim. I've never had someone call me to my face. Well, not in a professional setting anyway, the N word, right? But I have to say that the most glaring example came for me when I was in high school. I remember when I was applying to college, and I had a guidance counselor who essentially told me that I need not apply to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill because it was highly unlikely that I would be accepted. Which was so foreign to me because I had done my homework. I knew what the SAT score requirement was. I knew what my grades needed to look like. I knew what my extracurricular activities needed to look like. And I had checked all those boxes. So I didn't understand why I had a guidance counselor telling me that it wasn't within my realm of possibility. And I asked her why. And she said, well, you've got to be at the top of your class to get into Chapel Hill. And I was like, well, I'm in the top 10. I think I have a good chance. And finally she said, has anyone from your family gone to UNC Chapel Hill? And of course the answer was no. And she said, well, you can spend your money if you want to, but that's probably outside of your realm of achievement. Well, I will tell you that not only did I get accepted, but I graduated, and I graduated in 3 years.
With 2 degrees.
With 2 degrees.
Oh, never mind. They asked me.
And I'm not saying that to brag, but what I am saying is that it was very, very, very telling to me that she took that approach with me. And then I later found out that another student who was not of color had a conversation with her about whether they should apply. They were further down the ranking that I was and all of that. And she encouraged that student who was not Black to apply. And so I just didn't understand it. But what I will say is I didn't understand it at the time. I just knew it didn't feel right. And I would go on to say, Tim, that those type of situations continue to show themselves when people say things like, "Oh wow, that were you the only Black, or you speak you speak well, you speak well." Well, I mean, I'm an educated person, so it makes no sense for you to tell me that I speak well. Of course I speak well. It's those kind of subtle comments that people make that aren't saying to you that I'm racist, but it certainly raises the question of why would you say that to me when you know that first of all, I'm an adult, I hold a graduate degree. Why would you tell me that I speak well? So Tim, I would just say it's the subtle things. It's not the blatant things that have been roadblocks. I will tell you, I've been so blessed to have, and I'll go back to this word ally again. I have walked in rooms and been blessed to hold positions that I know for a fact, but for God placing some friends in the room who were white to help open those doors, I wouldn't be there. I just simply would not be there because I didn't have the access on my own. But I thank God for those friends of ours who were willing to be allies and to speak a good word for me. Of course, once I was able to be in the room, I was able to do what I needed to do. But I'm thankful because, but for those people, I absolutely just would not have had those opportunities. And there are so many examples I can't even count. But the most recent one I would say right now, my career that I have in municipal law. I mean, I'm the assistant city attorney in Charlotte because back when I was in law school, and I'm try to say this without crying, Bob Yelton, one of the wealthiest white men in Shelby, gave me an opportunity in his firm. He didn't know me from Adam, but he gave me an opportunity, introduced me to a whole body of law, taught me all that he knew, and it opened up a door. And I tell him often, and he grew up during the civil rights era. He grew up when Shelby High School was still segregated. But he gave me an opportunity, and I'm forever grateful. So that's a long way to answer that.
And I really, you have two individuals who I guess talk for a living, and we're raising one now that wants to say just as much as we say. And so this is Maya, ladies and gentlemen. This is our youngest child. She's 2 years old, and she will make cameos and appearances from here and there. But what I would say is Andrea and I lived growing up stark differences in growing up. I joke with Andrea all the time. I introduced her to the black community. I grew up in some, I won't say rougher areas of our culture, but being raised in upstate New York and then moving down south to Charlotte, North Carolina, living on the north side of Charlotte, and having a totally different experience. I wasn't introduced to, I would say, white America until I got to grad school. I went to Campbell Divinity School out of North Carolina Central University in Durham, predominant African HBCU, and Durham is a population where African American race is the majority. And so, going from that perspective and growing up in that perspective to walking in the corridors of Campbell School of Divinity was a culture shock for me. It was a major culture shock. And I told Andrea, my fiance at the time, I don't know how I'm gonna survive this. I don't know how I'm gonna make it. And I can say that I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Campbell being my introduction into it, and I would say some of that introduction wasn't all great introduction. I remember having lunch with some of the few African American students while we were there, and one of the main complaints was we don't get as many opportunities in chapel to preach as some of our others. Now, some of that may be because it's less of us and more of them, but we felt as though somebody need to say something. Well, I was already struggling with the culture, so I wasn't gonna say a thing. I wasn't gonna say nothing because I'm borderline between this B I got and this C that I'm probably gonna end up getting if I don't make this thing work out well. And so I'm not gonna say nothing because I don't want me being on the borderline to push me one way or the other. So I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna be quiet. And I say that in jest, but the fact of the matter is, many days, me and Mark Powell and Chalmers McDougall and some of the others sat at the table and had serious conversations about why is it that we can offer just as much as others in chapel as somebody else, and the only deduction that we can come up with is because the color of our skin. And after 1 year, I left Campbell, got married, did some other things in life. And then I finally, thank God for his divine way that he brings everything together. He strategically placed Miss Harmon at at Campbell when I was admitted there, and when I reapplied for grad school, she was strategically placed at Gardner Webb. And when she saw my application, she called me and said, "Is this the same Jerret Fite that I knew at Campbell?" I said, "Yes." "Is this the same Carissa Harmon?" And she said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Boy, the Lord works in mysterious ways." And so I have always been strategically placed around people like the Harmons, who have just been so great to know and so affirmative in everything that they do. And so like my wife has had those experiences. I take the long end of the road as well to say I've never really blatantly been left out. Now my wife did allude to corporate America, and I think the last time I worked in corporate America, oh Lord, it's been some years. But the thing about it is, I felt as though every opportunity I should have gotten, I didn't, and it never was blatant of the reason why I never got it. But I think I worked just as hard, had just as good as qualifications as anybody. But in the inner part of me, I always felt as though it was because I was a black man. No company will probably ever covertly, or not covertly, but overtly say, no, we're not hiring you for that team lead position or for that supervisory role because you're a black man. And it never really dawned upon me why. It just, a better selection was selected. And so I have that on the inside of me, but I'm thankful that God has blessed me to pastor beautiful people in Sherrall, South Carolina.
And Tim, before we leave that topic, I think I alluded to it earlier, but I just have to say to this group of friends that we have on this Zoom call, if you see it, Maya said, "Hey."
Maya.
If you see an opportunity to be an ally, please take it. If you see an opportunity to introduce a friend, a black friend, to a new group of people, a new circle, please do it, because so much of what God has blessed and allowed in our lives, and as I said before, particularly in my professional life, has had to do with the fact that somebody gave me a chance in a room that I wouldn't have known but for that. So, and it, like I said, it started back as early as high school, middle school, or whatever. I remember when I was in middle school, a friend of mine, we would joke about the fact that we were two black dots on a big old white sheet of paper. And that was our way of coping. That was our way of coping with the fact that we were the only two blacks in a class full of white students. So to Jerret's point about having to navigate rooms, we joke about things like that, but it's a real thing for us to have to, as people of color, to have to navigate, and I'll be frank, a white world. And so it's be kind, be open, and please be willing to share your spaces. Please be willing to share your networks, because that's an opportunity.
I'm sorry, my daughter's trying to write checks.
Starting early. Listen, I want to give everybody on this Zoom call an opportunity to ask a question. So I'm going to, whoever unmutes first, great. And if you're not the first one to unmute, if you want to maybe kind of put your name in the chat box, I'll try to make sure kind of moderate it in turn, but want to give y'all an opportunity to ask. And I've got a couple of things I want to come back to before we close, but make sure we get everybody an opportunity to speak. The questions or things that we've been talking about over the last several weeks, things that you've experienced that you would like to ask Jerret and Andrea about, and and see where their experiences coincide and overlap. any questions that you have? All right, I'll continue the conversation as you see opportunities that you want to jump in, maybe type in the chat box and
Yeah.
we'll go from there.
Susan and Kathy, I think, is trying to say something.
Who is that?
Susan and Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Nance here. I'd like to know, you lived here in Rutherford County. Is that my correct understanding?
I pastored St. John Amy Zion Church
Right.
in County. We still resided in Kings Mountain. As I used to tell people, we were close enough to be there if something happened, but further enough members just didn't show up to our house.
I see. My question was, what have been your experiences here in our county, or experiences that you've heard about?
I had a great, as Pastor Marsh alluded to earlier, and I know Sister Harmon told me that I don't have to be so formal, but I guess it's how I'm wired in some of this formality. But I'll say Tim with cringing teeth. But as Tim alluded to earlier, we had a great working relationship with Don Schofield. I don't think Chris Beebe is at the Episcopal Church any longer. I think she retired and now is living a life of grandparenthood. We had a wonderful working relationship, and with individuals like the mayor, as well as the sheriff, and we just work so well together. Now, some of our parishioners of the church had some experiences that really, it was a phone call away from me. If I heard about something that one of our members at the St. John Church dealt with, I had a great relationship with the police department. They could pick up the telephone, and I remember before Bible study one Wednesday night, 2 officers came to the church, and we drove out to somewhere some of our members live in Rutherfordton, and I introduced 2 Caucasian officers at the time to a plethora of our members at St. John, just so that they can gain some type of allegiance. And I think everybody in Rutherfordton knows Ken Hines. Ken Hines came outside and said, "Oh, I know them boys. I used to coach them in baseball." And so next thing you know, people that I didn't even realize lived in that community, he started to bring some perspective and some added value to the conversation that we were having based off of some concerns that some of our members had at the time. And so it was a great working relationship from my experience, where the close-knit community afforded us the opportunity to make a phone call and to get somebody. Pastoring in larger areas like a Rock Hill, you get a voicemail and you may get a call back 3 or 4 days later, and then by then, it's not the same effect. And so it's a very stark difference from having, pastoring in Rutherfordton to pastoring somewhere else, maybe a little larger.
Thank you.
Kathy, Susan and Kathy, I don't know if you were just asking from the ministerial perspective, but I practiced, when I was practicing in Cleveland County, a good part of my practice also bled over into Rutherford County. And what I will tell you is that, I don't know if Laura Powell is still on the bench or not, but she was an extremely compassionate judge when I was there, and she was particularly sensitive to the diversity plight and the economic plight of people that came before her. And I want to highlight that for just a second, because the criminal justice system, which could be a whole other conversation for more time than we have tonight, but anytime that you walk into a courtroom and you recognize the disproportionate number of people of color in a courtroom as opposed to as opposed to whites, you quickly understand that there are challenges that relate to those dynamics that are much deeper than just the criminal aspect of it. But there's also the socioeconomic issues that come along with it as well. And that often impacts representation of clients, that often impacts access to programs. And so I would just say that Rutherford County is, while it is very, very compassionate, you've got some compassionate leaders there. One of the things that I would say areas of improvement perhaps would be, again, for some allies to be available to work with, particularly people who are in youth programs who may have found themselves in a criminal situation, but perhaps with some different community service opportunities, some different mentoring relationships that could help. I would say it could help deter someone from a much more significant life of crime if they were able to be caught at an earlier age and mentored and stabilized in that way. And a great way to do that is through, there are all kinds of court programs that are available, but particularly the Guardian Ad Litem program is an excellent program. And also, again, just being willing to help, because I'll give a quick example. I defended a student in Rutherford County who had been charged with misdemeanor larceny for stealing a chicken sandwich from the lunchroom. Now, we were able to work through those issues and get the child, get the child, I would say 16-year-old child, get the child some community service and avoid a record. But imagine that student who wouldn't have had the support of legal assistance. And what does it look like to have a misdemeanor larceny on your record before you even turn 18 years old? Yeah. That's major. So I think, again, community partnerships being available, and I think the church does a great job of being available to help, but I think that's one thing that we can improve on. And that's just not just Rutherford County, Susan and Kathy, I think that's communities across the board. But I would tell you have a great community, keep working hard, but keep finding ways to build those relationships.
Thank you.
Susan and Kathy, thank you. Pat Job is next.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad Susan and Kathy are here. Tim, I told you the Unitarian Universalists are dogging your steps, buddies. So there's three of us here tonight, and in the future to come, there'll be many more. I also want to praise Reverend Fite and Reverend Marsh for both pronouncing all 4 syllables in Rutherfordton. It's quite an accomplishment to get all 4 of those syllables in there. Andrea, you gave us the challenge of always looking for opportunities to be allies. And I did a television show about 12 years ago down in Charleston. I interviewed 30 people who'd been involved in the civil rights movement, both white people and black people. And in each one of those interviews, we're talking hours and hours of recordings, most of which didn't get used. But talking to all these people, I asked them, I said, how often do you share a meal with a person from the other race? How often do you white people eat with black folks? How often do you black folks eat with white folks? And the answer that I got over and over again was almost never. So I think we can follow on Andrea's challenge to create different circles of influence to introduce each other to different people if we'll break bread together. Now, I know we've got a challenge right now with COVID, but hopefully COVID's not going to last forever. And when we are more clear to spend time breaking bread together, and of course we can do it at a social distance now. Let's get together and share meals. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for your prophetic voice, brother.
Pat, thank you. Thank you for that reminder. Did y'all want to comment on that? I saw your screen flash.
No, I Pat, you're right. And I will say that I probably did not pronounce all of the syllables, probably because I'm from around the way and I know how to say Rutherfordton, and that's just kind of how we do it. But no, in all sincerity, you're absolutely right. I think we do have to find those opportunities to your point, break bread together, and particularly those who are who have children. I think it's incumbent upon us to allow our networks of children, right, to play together, and not just play together at school, but come over to the house when those opportunities present themselves. Like I said, I have a very vivid memory as a child of being told that I would not be allowed to go over to my best friend at school's parents' house because of the color of my skin. And so I'm intentional about it with my children now to ensure that they have different friends who don't look like them. But to your point, I think it's important that we do it as adults also, but it requires intentionality on our parts.
Well, and to piggyback on what she said, that's part of the plight of African Americans in this country. When you're trying to navigate the different cultures across our wonderful melting pot of people, the problem is with the African American race, we're not American enough to be American. But if we're too much American, then the black community say we're not black enough to be a part of the black community. So, my wife and I, degreed individuals that continue to work well and want to raise our children to work hard to accomplish things as well. Some of our individuals, and I have friends who jokingly have said, I think you might be married to a white woman at times. I've even had people who didn't know my life outside of work and ask me, are you married to a white woman? And I'm not saying that you can't marry who you love, but what I am saying is, what about me? The way I talk, the way I carry myself, the way I try to pay my taxes and live right says to another culture that I must be married to somebody outside of my own. And I don't know how I get that tattoo off my forehead, but I'm just saying that we sometimes have these preconceived notions of what's right. And when you have an African American who's living right or trying to do the right thing, then somebody must be from another race influencing you to live this way. It can't be your own race. And that in and of itself, for me, is a form of racism, in my opinion. But I feel as though, why can't I be excellent and still be married to an excellent black woman? Why can't I be excellent and be raised by two African American excellent parents? Why can't I be excellent and then try to instill that same excellence in my African American children? Why do I have to have another race's influence in order to be excellent?
Thank you. I think Terry had to cut off the Zoom call. She told me she might be in and out, but I think her question that she typed in the chat box is one y'all would love to handle. I know we would love to hear an answer to it. She says, I'm afraid there are plenty of things white people do that we think are helpful, but actually are not. Do you have words of wisdom for us about that?
What's that? I will say, don't look at these opportunities as acts of charity or pity. I'll say it that way. Don't look at building relationships as an act of pity to someone who is either beneath you or somehow deficient in some way. It's an opportunity for growth for both or all who participate. And so when you approach a person of color or a group of persons of color, when you do it with a sense of humility and common respect, then I think there's an opportunity for growth. It's when people can sense pity, whether you say it or not. And a person of color may never say to you, you're trying to pity me. But we know that. We're not stupid. So I would ask you all, as much as I've asked you tonight, to be allies in those relationships. Don't pity us while you do it, because we don't need your pity. We need your respect.
Awesome.
That's what I was going to say.
Andrea, thank you so much there. Huge. huge point. Jerret, did you really have anything to add to that? Or you, I guess, anybody else have some
We're
questions?
potty training, so I'm gonna go run potty. Take her to the potty. I'll be back.
I was just about to ask a question to Andrea, but she is gone. But Dr. Fite, you may know, being that she is it district? What's her title in Charlotte?
She's the assistant deputy county attorney for Charlotte.
Okay, and my question was, working in that position, what have been some of the biggest challenges working with other races other than African American folks?
Oh yeah, you don't want me to answer that question for her. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who don't know, this is one of the finest members, but fine members at the Robinson Church. But this is one of those fine members of the Robinson Church I'm pleased to serve, Sister Linda Campbell. She's our assistant leader of leaders, and she helps wherever is needed. And so I think Linda, it doesn't matter if I'm on Zoom, I'm preaching in Timbuktu, she gonna be there. She gonna be there. So I appreciate Miss Campbell and her vigorous support, as well as some others that are on here as well. Sister Evelyn, Gail, Jimmy, I see them.
Yeah, Reverend Ellis on. I think Reverend
Ellis.
Yeah,
Reverend Ellis. I'm sorry, Reverend Ellis. I didn't intentionally mean to miss you. But your question was about white America and corporate America, right?
Somewhat.
And navigating those waters.
Right. Well, what has been her experience with working? Of course, I work in the public until next week anyway. But what have been her experience with working with folks? I mean, people of different race. How has that affected her?
I can say it's been some years, as we alluded to earlier, about me working in corporate America. But I can say for me, my best practice was always be quiet. My daddy instilled in me and my sister early on that, you're at a job to provide a life and a living for you and your family. You're not there for all of the other things. My dad was a real matter-of-fact kind of person. And so he really, when they gave him awards and stuff on his job, he really didn't care too much for those. He just needed you to pay him what you owe. That was his big thing. Pay me what you owe me. So I had a tunnel vision in corporate America. And I know my wife navigates waters a little differently than I have. Only because, oh Lord, navigate. Don't tell everybody about and so navigating those waters sometimes. This is a question for you. I'm just filling the space. Sister Campbell asked. Ms. Campbell, ask your question the way you asked.
My question was, you, Sister Andrea, in your daily job duty that you have right now, what have been some of the challenges that you faced, or one particular challenge that you faced working with other people of another race, you being in the position that you're in?
And I'll start with the most common thing. It doesn't happen quite as often as it used to, but being mistaken as the paralegal. And not that there's anything wrong with being a paralegal. I'm so thankful for my paralegals because they're my right hands. But the general assumption when I walked into the room that I am the paralegal and not the attorney was something that I had to learn to manage. And I don't think that's just germane to being a person of color. I think that has everything to do with the fact that I'm still in a very male-dominated profession. But I will say that it's funny that you would ask that question, because where I am now, of course, Charlotte is a much more diverse place, but I've gone to some of the most rural places in our state where they don't see Black attorneys very often. And so The challenge I have now is just I would say representing my race and my gender with integrity, so that when people see us, other women like me, they're not surprised and they don't assume that I'm the paralegal. They don't assume that that person, that a woman that walks in is the paralegal, but rather, certainly if she approaches the bar, that she is in fact an attorney and licensed to be there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think Darla has her hand up, Tim.
Darla, were you next?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for being here. A lot of us are just getting started on some of the hard work with our white friends and having the conversations that really explain a lot of the history to people who never have looked, and trying to convince those friends to come along with us. How do we do that in a more public setting, like editorials or so on, without appearing like we're talking down to our Black friends? And I think that's a concern. It's like we don't want to alienate our Black friends by trying to explain concepts to our white friends, in larger settings and at protests and things like this. So have you experienced anything like that? And do you have any suggestions? Thank you.
Well, I would dare say that sometimes some parts of our history hurts. And one thing I learned early on from my mother is some things there's no way of making it feel better. It's gonna hurt. I remember growing up one time. I broke my leg, and my mom gave me the best pep talk I could ever get. That really, hindsight looking at it, wasn't a great pep talk. But I asked my mother, "Is it gonna hurt taking it off?" And she was honest. Yes, it does. But the truth of the matter is, do you want to leave it on? Or do you want to walk again? so in my mind, I was like, yeah, I want to walk. I'm tired of laying in the floor because I had a body cast. I broke half of one leg and all of another, and so I was very young. I think it was in fourth, fifth grade. No, I wasn't that young. I was younger than that, first grade. But needless to say, those words sometimes stick with me, and I transfer learning. Some parts of history is just painful. And instead of playing around with it, you got to be honest. And the truth of the matter is, we have told African Americans to get over some stuff that we have never told any other race of people. We've told African Americans, get over slavery. And you didn't go through it. Which is not fair, because we're still living the residual from that action. And we didn't tell Jews to get over Holocaust. We didn't tell Native Americans to get over the Trail of Tears. We're not telling any other race to get through some painful parts of their history. Why is it that we got to skate across the painful nature that we've sent the African American community through? And the fact of the matter is, sometimes we have to be honest with where we stand in history. And we have to be able to tell it, not with sugar-coated or rose-colored glasses. We have to be honest by the mere fact that there are some parts of the history that we love and that we lift up and that we call heritage that has hurt another race. And at the end of the day, you can lift up your heritage all day, every day. But the fact of the matter is, when you lift up yours, it's a painful stain for mine. And that's where we got to understand. And so me wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, nowhere in the Black Lives Matter history has it pained another race. But you putting on a Confederate shirt, there is a part of history that has pained another race. And so we have to be honest with the fact that if you're going to represent your history has hurt someone else's.
Darla, I would echo what Jerret has said, and I won't rehash it, but I will say I think there's a lot to be said for looking at policy and educational reform, and I mentioned earlier during our conversation the fact that during my elementary years, probably most of middle school years, I didn't hear a lot about Black history, nor did I hear a lot about what I would suggest is a balanced view of history. And I think it's important that as we begin to learn more about one another, again, those of you who are allies, I would ask that we all challenge our networks, our circles, to teach our children a more balanced view of cultural acceptance. And by doing that, I think not only are we impacting ourselves, we're impacting the next generation. Because a lot of what we're talking about is just unfamiliarity, or just not understand or misunderstanding of one another. And so I think we cannot leave this conversation thinking that there's, I'm not saying we need to legislate our way out of this, but I do think there's a place for us to begin educating our next generation. And as we do that, we'll be educating ourselves.
I want to say, Dr. Harmon, please give our warmest regards to your beautiful wife. I saw she's had to sign off, but love you all immensely. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions that we have from y'all? These are excellent conversation topics.
Okay.
Jerret, there was a question that I wanted to just ask pastor to pastor. One of the things that my home church in Birmingham experimented with was looking at, what it meant to be in a community that was predominantly African American, but then a predominantly white church, and what it meant for our church to begin, receiving African Americans into the congregation. I always thought that was a beautiful picture of the kingdom of God. One of the things that I have, been just chewing on is I would love to see Sunday not be the most segregated hour of the week, 11 a.m. Sunday. But then looking at it maybe from a perspective of, not just the African American community, but any minority community, I do get the need that African Americans need their own space. And I get that maybe Latino need their own space. I think it's wrong for white people to say white only. So I want to get that clear. But I also see the need for a minority, though, to say we need our own space. And so when we talk about ecumenical cooperation, and we talk about maybe some of the dreams of every tribe, tongue, nation, and language, how do you navigate maybe there's some need for the minority to remain in their own space, but then also how do we work together to see some of that, work out in the church? And that's been one that's just something that I've been just really chewing on, that I don't have an answer for.
Well, Pastor Marsh, you and I have had many conversations about said thing. And I believe that right before I left the St. John Church, you and I were talking about working a possibility of maybe in the community doing some pulpit swapping to try to at least in some way help that effort in some kind of way. It's not a complete fix, but it's some type of way we can help. And Dr. Harmon is far more of a church historian than I am, but I'm gonna take a stab at this. Some of this is systemic from our historical perspective, that African Americans were never afforded the same opportunities in the white congregations as they do in their own church. So the freedoms that we express are now limited because some folk are scared of change. And I will say that from all races and all communities. The fact of the matter is most predominantly African American communities don't want Caucasian individuals to come in and change how they like to worship the Lord, and vice versa. White Americans don't want African Americans to come into their church and tell them that you ought to do it a little different and you do it your way, because that becomes uncomfortable. But I think the kingdom of God looks at it in a way that everyone has their way of worship. I think the Hebrew Bible gives us 16 ways to honor God. Yada, Shabbat, and it doesn't matter which way you choose. God likes all of them, and so when we limit our worship space to say I worship because I need this, I need that, and we exclude others for their freedoms of ability to worship, then that hinders what God wants in our worship. And so I think the harder work is not the worship. I think the harder work is the acceptance that we can work with one another. We can worship with one another. And some of those come with prejudices that we have to do the hard work as ministers to try to break those barriers and those walls. I have historically, from St. John to even when I was a youth pastor at Marvin, at Rutherfordton, now in Sherrall, I've historically wanted to work with all races of individuals.
And you did, yeah.
But the hard fact is, I never, and maybe y'all can help me. I know this is a forum where we supposed to be helping y'all. Maybe y'all can help me. I've never been successful at gaining a Caucasian member. I don't know. Maybe I need to shave or something. I don't know. Y'all help me out. Give me some pointers on what will make me a little more attractive. Do I not need to yell as much?
I don't know about the attractive part. I'm just playing.
Not in that way. I came with this one. I'm leaving with this one. so, but no. I say that jokingly. But the fact of the matter is, there's something about, I would say, the black church, and I hate saying that, but because it's God's church at the end of the day, but it's predominantly African American, and so it's something about that church where some individuals, Hispanic Americans, Caucasian Americans, just don't find that attractive to go to church and worship, and vice versa. Those spaces, the way they worship, the way they preach or teach, is not attractive on a consistent basis. You know, it's okay for the Martin Luther King celebration. We get that one, yes we can message a year, and we good. We've met our quota for the year, but can we get that every single week? When I was in Rutherfordton, it's bedtime, y'all. When I was in Rutherfordton, I don't know if you remember, Tim, but when we had the Charleston 9 assassinations, I would say.
Yes.
We had a concert. East End Baptist Church from Virginia came and was on tour. And there was a bunch of African American youth that was singing. And then during the interlude between the first half and the second half, we had the community of Rutherfordton come together and light candles for each member who passed away. It was a wonderful sign of unity. And as Tim and I have had conversations, it was a great depiction of heaven in Rutherford. And so we gotta find better ways. Even if we can't do it on a consistent Sunday to Sunday, we gotta find better ways to do more of that. And I think the hard work is between clergymen, between colleagues, for us to sit down, as brother Pat said earlier, to sit down, break some bread, and throw some of these ideas out there. And if our members see us, me and you, Tim, standing together, and see us speaking the same language, trying to operate together, then that will start to permeate the atmosphere, I think, a little bit better, and try to begin the conversations to diffuse some of the myths and dispel some of the preconceived notions that individuals have about all of our churches.
Gotcha. Jerret, thank you. I want to make sure, as our time's kind of moving to an end, Hope had a question, and this may be, I've got 10 after, this may be the last question we have before maybe a little bit of a wrap up. So Hope, you're up.
Thanks, Tim. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to thank Jerret and Andrea. And Andrea, thanks for giving back on the government forum side. I've been a kind of a professional city planner all my life. So I really appreciate your work, and I think that's awesome. And I guess this is just kind of a comment. I mean, I respect the dialogue, especially with the last question that we had about, you know, getting together and bridging these gaps, because I think it's so important. At the same time, you know, sometimes I was talking about this earlier this evening with my husband, and you know, sometimes it's also an acknowledgement of keeping faith, but also recognizing that we're stuck in sort of an imperfect system. And in trying to understand, I guess, like, you know, in the South, this whole concept of dominion and some of these themes that are interwoven in evangelical religious spaces, you know, with just earth is here for the taking, and you know, this is mine and this is yours. I'm being a little abstract, and I'm not going to ask this question right because I'm not an academic. I'm sort of more of a career city planner where rubber meets the road. But what I saw every day in my work was, you know, people or systems, even systems where, you know, they would spray herbicide on landscape without acknowledgement. And these were in the days of non-EPA approved herbicides, right? You know, and then running, you know, highways through communities that were not really, you know, able to defend themselves. And, you know, these kind of core issues in the landscape of social justice, I don't, you know, I'm just kind of imperfect in my thinking about them, and trying so hard to look for ways to have dialogue, kind of like how you and Tim were just talking about it. I mean, I think it's that the only way, I mean, we have to look for multiple paths into it. We have to look for paths within our faith communities, and we have to look for paths within our government communities. And then we have to acknowledge that it's an imperfect system. And especially the political system, to me, it just feels like a football game right now. It feels like a hysterical football game, our national political situation. And I mean, I don't want to so much get lost in that commentary, but I just think it's essential that we look for and define those channels, especially in the South.
Hope, I couldn't agree more. It is systemic, and there are so many layers to your point about city planning. I mean, that's a whole other conversation about how communities are how segregation and redlining and just eminent domain. There's so many things that go along with how communities are divided and/or I would go as far as to say possibly legally segregated in a way that divides even further our community engagement and ability to build those relationships. But again, we have to be intentional, and we as stakeholders, I've called us allies on this conversation, but I would go as far as to say we're stakeholders as well. We've got to be engaged in the conversation in a way. Those of us who are learned in various subject matters, when we see, my husband often uses the card metaphor of call a spade. When you see something, when you see injustice in whatever form, in whatever field that you work in, call it out, and be willing to call it out in a way that engages the conversation and not alienate others. But at the same time, again, call it out, because as a city planner, Hope, I mean, I know you've seen things happen that could have a very real impact for the progeny of generations to come. Educators, you see the same thing in testing and the way we teach about certain topics. As an attorney, I see it in my field. And I just challenge all of us to be engaged in our various realms of influence in a meaningful way, to acknowledge our differences. I think you use the example of a melting pot. I like the salad bowl, because there's a lot of purpose and meaning in us retaining our individual identities, while at the same time appreciating one another.
And I would dare say, for me, and my wife and I had this conversation, I think last week. Some of it is contextual. Our thought process is derived contextually. You talk about evangelicals, or you talk about Southern Baptists, you talk about different cultures or groups of people in the Christian field. They all will tell you, we believe in Jesus Christ. I did a guest lecture at Gardner Webb with Dr. Littlejohn, and I asked the question to the class, which Christ? Which Christ? Because there's a painting of the Bible that's of where it says, slaves, obey your masters. And so there's some people who hold on to that. You slave, you need to obey your master. And then there's another part where Moses show up to Pharaoh, say, let my people go. And then there's a group that hold on to that part and say, well, he a liberator. He's a God of liberation. All of them talking about the same Bible. But they're talking about it from two different perspectives. And that lends us opportunities to say, my culture has shaped my lenses of how I see liberation, how I see togetherness, how I see us working together, how I see us not working together, how I see us confined in certain groups. And so until we get a better theology and understanding contextually of what we're supposed to think and how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to, and then carry that message out to, as my wife says, stakeholders and allies and those individuals to continue to permeate those messages. And I know our time is done, but I'll conclude by saying this. My wife and I show up everywhere, like every year, like everybody else, to open house. And we give the same message every year as our children get older and we meet different teachers. Our message is the same. Communicate with us what you're communicating in the classroom so we can reinforce what you've already tried to teach. When he comes home, we're not trying to teach our children something different than what you've already taught and reinforced. And so what we need to do is we need to get a message and make sure that message is cohesive enough that it can go across the board and have people reinforce that message when they go out in their communities and in their cultures. And so that now we have, and that's why things like this is a beautiful experience, because now with this language, you can go back out into your cultures, into, your silos, and begin now to speak the language that would be acceptable on your job or at home or, at your family reunions. I don't know if everybody had family reunions, but that's a big thing.
Thank you.
I feel like for me, we could go on for a lot longer, but I know that we need to, wrap this up. And I know Jerret and Andrea have just been so gracious with their time. Rebecca and I love y'all, and we miss you, and just so grateful for the opportunities that we have to keep in touch. But then also thank you for sharing your time with us tonight, and just and giving us some really honest, heartfelt, and sometimes tough answers tonight to some of the questions that you've given. And we really value and appreciate that. So thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Tim, for your visionary leadership to even host something like this. To you and Rebecca, I jokingly said to Rebecca earlier that I feel like I'm in touch with her life because of Instagram. So I thank God. I thank God for her posting of the kids and of things y'all do. And I know, Tim, you don't agree to all them outfits that you wear, but I thank you for that. It gives me a great light at the end of my day sometimes when I'm scrolling and I see Tim dressed up in a cowboy outfit. I appreciate it.
Oh goodness, yeah. Thank y'all so much. And guys, I'll keep posting on the Facebook page. If you are interested in Malcolm X, let me know. We'll be trying to put that together for September 14 at the same time. If you can get a copy of the book, and if not, we can do it another time. But looking forward to. And there's a great movie. Our favorite actor, Denzel Washington, plays Malcolm X. So there's a great movie too that if you can't get a hold of the book. So
before we leave, and I know we have to, I just want to say thank you all again, and I want to thank our Robinson Amy Zion family for being on tonight. There's several of our church family members on here tonight, and they're always such a supportive group, and we just thank them and love them, and thank you all for being part of this conversation too, because it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, it's not a monologue. So we just thank you all for being a part.
Y'all take care, okay? Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great evening.
Bye.